Hey, it's Michael, and this is the Kintsugi Podcast. I'll be back in a minute with this week's conversation about resilience. But first, if you wish to create a better life and have a better career, then please visit michaelobrienshift.com and download your free workbook on how to create a better life. In it, you'll discover ways to find more energy for the things and the people who matter most to you, so you can create a better tomorrow. Hey there, it's Michael, and welcome back, or welcome to the Kintsugi Podcast. It's time for another conversation about resilience. Now, all this month in our Leadership Academy, we have focused in on an essential for a great life and a great career. If 2020 showed us anything, it showed us that we can't do these things alone. We need, as I would say, a strong peloton, but you could call it your tribe, clan, network, community, whatever you wish to call it. What we need is connection. And today's guest, in my humble opinion, is a guru when it comes to connection. In fact, we met several years ago via Twitter. She reached out to me, and that was the start of our connection. The relationship started slowly, but we kept it going over the years, and now it's blossomed into something very special. I think she's a gem, and I know you will also feel the same way about her when you get to the end of our conversation about resilience today. She has a goal of reaching out to 3 strangers a day. In fact, her TEDx talk that was done in Seattle is all about the importance of talking to strangers. So when the world seems so big, what our guest, Teresa Savadago, does, she tries to make it smaller. She tries to build this wonderful network, her peloton, if you will. And what she's been able to do by having this philosophy and taking this action is build an impressive network of people that are 1 degree away from something wonderful and something special. So if you're out walking, I hope you enjoy our conversation. If you're at home, sit back, grab your coffee or tea, and enjoy a conversation. Teresa may be a stranger to you now, but at the end of the interview, I know you will consider her a friend, just like I do. Enjoy the conversation. Hey, Teresa. Good to see you.
Hey, Michael.
So this is going to be so cool. People are going to be in for a lot of wisdom and fun. And I can't wait for this conversation. This is one of the highlights of my day. It's one of my highlights of the week. You are my connection guru, expert, inspiration, like all those other words that we can use. So let's start here, because I actually don't know this part of your story. So we're going to go back a few years. We're going to go back to maybe when you were growing up, or maybe it was in college, or whenever it happens to be. But what got you all jazzed up about connection and networking and people and their stories? So share with the audience.
So I think it's important to say that I'm from the Midwest. And in the Midwest, we have a saying that strangers are friends you have never met before. And I took that to heart. And that is also, my dad was a traveling salesman. And so he would always come home from his trips and talk about the people that he met. Or, he had a CB radio at the time. And so he was constantly talking to people and learning new things and bringing back little insights from wherever he was traveling. And one of the things that my dad used to like to do is pile all the kids and me and my brother in the car and just go for a drive. Like, I don't care where, and to see what you can see, just open-ended, anything goes. And I was a horse nut, and stuff my dad would do to satisfy that is he would see horses off the side of the road, and I would have my face planted on the car window, and my dad would actually pull into the driveway and say, my kid's a horse nut. Can we just, say hi to the horses? And, every now and then he'd slip them some cash and say, can we saddle one of them up and go for a ride? And my dad was very famous for doing that. But, and as a kid, to know that there were people everywhere that you could engage with was really exciting. And so I started selling Girl Scout cookies. And one of the things that I loved doing was going door to door and getting, and it would be cold. It's February in the Midwest. People would invite you out of the snow into their home. And so you got a chance to like look around. Oh, what kind of cookies do you like? And that kind of thing. And so it snowballed from there, but it got really early validation that it was okay and that people were really cool. And in particular, I had one neighbor who, one of the things that is part of my inspiration for connecting with people is what is the genius inside of somebody and like how can I learn from that? What is the really cool thing about this person? And I had a neighbor of mine who was an artist and his wife was an attorney and they were Black, but he would set up his driveway and he would host like jazz band practice on the driveway. He also had a black belt in karate. And so he would practice on the lawn and I would, deliver papers. I had a paper route and I would come by and he'd be like, here, let me show you some moves. Or as an artist, he would say, I could see him working and he would say, well, come in, let me show you what I'm working on. And so it was just a fountain of him sharing his life with me. But then it would turn into, he started giving karate lessons to all the kids in the neighborhood. And, so it was it was a really fantastic validation that there are amazing people everywhere. Some of them live 5 houses down the street. Some of them live a block and a half, but like, who knows? They're everywhere.
That is so cool. I want to capture what you said up front. Strangers are friends that we haven't met yet. I love that. I love that. So let's talk about our origin story, our origin connection. We met on Twitter, and then I'm going to let you share the story because I love this about our relationship. And we're going to talk a little bit further about like how it's evolved over time, but why don't you take it from the beginning?
Yeah. So I used to have a blog and I would interview people that were fascinating to me. And then I'd type up my notes and throw it on my blog. When I decided to sunset that blog, I had a bunch of people I was following on Twitter. And I asked a mentor of mine, I said, well, will people stop talking to me if I retire my blog? I was really worried about that because, it's a lot of work, but it was also, a really great source of inspiration. And she's like, probably. And I decided one day to like start testing that theory. And so I went through my Twitter feed and I actually spun it like a roulette wheel. And it was like, ding. I wonder if I can get this person to talk to me.
That is so cool.
You were one of them. And so I sent you a DM and I said, hey, Michael, I'm really curious about you. I wonder if we could hop on a call. And you said yes.
Yeah.
That's where it started.
That is so cool. I remember you reaching out. And at that point in time, most of the DMs I was getting on Twitter were like, I want to sell you something or download this or a bunch of spam. And then yours popped in. I was like, yeah, why not? And what we were talking about this before we hit the record button. But the really cool thing about our relationship is, we had that initial conversation and then we had a little fluttering of like following each other on Twitter. And I think the next spot we started following each other on Facebook and maybe then LinkedIn. I saw some of your posts, you saw some of my posts, maybe a like, maybe a comment, but it was sort of like that. And then there was a period too, that was a little bit quiet because the algorithm wasn't like matching us up.
Yep.
And then I would say the last 2 years, the long tail, the way I would describe it is a slow burning fire, right? So it's just like, it doesn't catch. And then all of a sudden it like catches. And now over the last 2 years, the connection is at a much deeper level. So thus proving that some relationships, have to like mature and you got to let them breathe and stay connected and to have some patience with them because you never know what they're going to blossom into.
I love that you said that though, too, because one of the things that I was thinking about is when we first met, if I remember right, one, I think your book was coming out pretty soon.
Yes.
And I was going through a personal transition period in my life. And so, I didn't really have a whole lot to offer and I didn't really know what you were up to. And I think you were launching your business and doing some things around that. So there's this period of time, I call it a fallow period. There's a fallow period where people are I'm just doing my thing. I got to work on my thing. Right. And so what was really interesting, I think, about you in particular is that the door was always open and it was always there. It was just at the time I didn't really have a whole lot of conversation, like questions, and I didn't feel at the time that I had a lot to give. Originally it started just because I was curious and evolving, and I was evolving personally myself. Then when I started to have more targeted questions, you kept showing up in my feed, and I was like, well, I wonder if he would actually answer these questions. And we recently had a very real conversation about some stuff that was a big challenge for me. And you're like, listen, the door is always open. Like, I'm happy to give back. And one of the things that's been really cool for me too is since I launched my own like fireside chat and my mastermind group, to see you pop in and always add value. And so I'm just like, wow, this is so great that I get to add value back to your group too. So it's really fun to see how it's evolved.
Yeah, it's a little bit, like ripples in a pond, dominoes, a whole bunch of different analogies that we can use.
Yeah.
But I love the fact that our connection is at the place that is right now. It's really cool because I've met some really cool people in your Peloton, my language. And,
Yeah.
I know through this, you're going to meet a whole bunch of people in my Peloton and, our ripples will ripple into one another. Now, you have a beautiful TEDx talk on the importance of talking to strangers and talking to 3 strangers a day. I would love to get your perspective on how to network and connect with people during COVID, because that's been, the duh moment of the podcast here, the interview, is that's a game changer. And a lot of people I know are reluctant to do it, take some work. So how have you done it? How have you taken your philosophy of talking with strangers and then making it work in our current environment?
Yeah, I'm so glad that you asked about that, because that was one of the funny things about when my TEDx talk got released. It was March. And so I was like, okay, wait a minute. In my talk, I talk about the beauty of talking with strangers, but we're all on lockdown. And so nobody's out and about meeting everybody anymore. And in my talk, there's this part where I mentioned that on average, I meet 3 people a day. And that can be a brief encounter. It can be something much longer than that, but it's a very intentional thing to meet 3 people a day. One of the things that, as a result of COVID, that I thought about is, well, that doesn't have to change. Just how I go about it needs to change. And so I took it on as a personal challenge to see if I could keep meeting 3 people a day. And you are a perfect example of how it works. Right. So all I did was invite the conversation. And so I was like, okay, well, who else am I curious about? And one of the things is that I started doing is going through my social media feed and the contacts that I already had. And everybody has them. They have people in their network that they know, but they don't know, and they don't know all that well. So I started reaching out to some of those people and saying, I'd like to get to know you better. And I think that's an important thing I want to underscore, because a lot of people ask me, how do you do this? In fact, I had a friend of mine who asked me to even send screenshots of my engagement connections. Like, how do you do this?
Look, what do you actually say, or what do you actually write? That script almost people are
exactly.
looking for.
And it is like, it's actually, she's like, it's way simpler than you think. I would like to get to know you better is one thing that I like to say. It's like, hey, we've been Facebook friends forever. Like, I would really like an opportunity to get to know you better. And that happened to me recently. One of my contacts, I'm currently writing a book, and one of my contacts is a publisher in New York. And I didn't I didn't even remember connecting with her, but when we got on the phone, she was like, "Oh, hey, you know what? I see where you're at, and I like what you're doing. I am in a position to buy books and the kind of book that you're wanting to pitch, but I think you need an agent to help kind of wrangle it all together." And I was like, "That's great. Do you have any agents that you like to work with?" She said, "Yeah, here's 3 of them." And so this lady's been in my network for 5 years and we never had that conversation. And so that's gold that was in my network. And I didn't even really know how to leverage that or didn't even know that it was there. And another way that I look at it is on LinkedIn or Twitter or, wherever you are, Clubhouse. You and I were talking about how much we love Clubhouse. One of the things that I just like to say, "Hey, I'm curious. I'd like to get to know you better." And, or for instance, recently, so I have this mastermind group. And one of the things that I did, I started a fireside chat as a result of wanting to bring more great people in to come have a conversation about everything from tactical things to, like we just did one on how to source podcasts and be a great podcast guest. And or I brought in another woman who her name is Kelly Wright, and she originally started selling textbooks door to door and ended up working for a startup that grew to it's a unicorn startup here in Seattle, Tableau, that famously she exited with $100 million.
Wow, that's great.
Right? It's bonkers, right? Well, somebody in my mastermind group admired her hugely. And so I reached out to Kelly and said, "Hey, listen, will you come talk to us about your career trajectory? I'd love to hear more." And she was like, "Sure." And so what happened, she actually loved having that opportunity because it's a story that until that point, she never really told very often. And also, since she's left Tableau, we got a chance to talk about her second phase of her life, which is now she's getting more women on corporate boards, and she now sits on 5 corporate boards. And so, as a result of that, then she was able to introduce my group to the strategy behind how do you get a seat on a corporate board? Because she started with one and then added another one and then added another one. And now she's helping other women get on corporate boards. And so that one conversation pivoted into so many different things that it was incredible. And imagine, and I think about this all the time. Like that one conversation changed our lives. What would happen if I never bothered to reach out to her? We had talked earlier, or there was a question about when people are nervous to reach out to other people. And I think that this is a really great example of that. I like to think about in your life, there are people who have made an outsized impact on you for any number of reasons. It could be you met your wife, you got a great job, you had a sponsor. Imagine if that person was never there. And so, and all the things that would go away and how dramatically different your life would be because it wasn't there. And that's why I like to keep reaching out to people. I don't know where the magic is, but I need to keep showing up for it. My friend and I were having a conversation right before I got on this call, and we were talking about how she's like, "Make sure you tell them about this." So my friend Emily Carrion is a chief marketing officer for startups. She's now working on her 6th startup. And one of the things about her, I saw her speak at a conference or at Ignite, which is like a TEDx, except it's 5 minutes. And I remember when she was on stage and she gave her 5-minute talk on how to connect on Twitter and how to create a baller list and how that will it creates opportunities because of that. And I remember getting goosebumps, and I was like, I absolutely have to know this woman. And so I immediately that night went home and I connected with her on Twitter. I signed up for her newsletter, and I kept sending her notes like, "Hey, I really like that. That's amazing." It took us 2 years at least 2 years for us to actually form a real friendship and meet in person. She was like, I just wasn't ready for new people in my life at that time. I was going through this big growth spurt. And I wasn't really taking in new people. And she was like, but the cool thing is you were persistent. And now we are thick as thieves. We're supporting each other in a really big way. And I was just like, Emily, can you imagine what would happen if I never reached out to you? She's like, we both started tearing up and we were like, oh my God, I don't even want to think about that. Like that would be horrible. And so one of the things that I like to think a lot about is, when you get an inkling that you want to know somebody, be the one to make the first move.
Yeah. I love that story about you connecting with Emily. It's another one of those slow burning fires too, right? So it was just, it was catching and you probably wondered if it was ever going to catch, and then it caught on, and now you guys have like this wonderful bond. So I just love what you just shared. So one question for you. You've spoken to so many people. What have you learned about people? Because, in today's culture, what the media loves to portray is like how we're divided and so different, and we're fractured and everything else under the sun. But my hunch is that talking to a whole bunch of people in a whole bunch of different industries, doing a whole bunch of different things, that you found a lot of commonalities amongst all the people that you've spoken to. So I'm curious, like, what have you found out about other people?
I think the biggest takeaway is that everybody wants to be heard. And it's a really rare opportunity when somebody gets to speak from their soul in a way where somebody's not trying to interject their own agenda. They're not trying to shape it in some way to a particular outcome. They are just there to listen and ask questions in a way that really shows that you are showing up wholeheartedly for that conversation. I had a recent example of that where, and it could be anybody. It could be a 9-year-old kid or an 80-year-old man. Like, I think people have gone, we want to know that our moment on earth matters somehow, some way. And who really ever listens? Like, your family already has an idea about you. Your employer already has an idea about you. And it's really, really rare when somebody takes that moment and says, tell me your story. Like, I'm so curious. Like, how did you get from here to there? And I think that that's a really great example also of why people should actually just reach out and take that gutsy move and say, I'd like to know you better. Because, like, I was thinking about it today, like, I don't know why Michael actually wrote me back and wanted to get on a conversation. And so whether you're like looking to connect with somebody above you, at your level, or below, it really doesn't matter. I think people just want to be heard. And when you provide an opportunity for that, it's the biggest gift you possibly can get for somebody. But it goes both ways. And so an example that I'd like to share with you is that I mentioned Kelly Wright, who used to work for Tableau, and now she sits on several corporate boards. In our conversation for my fireside chat, I asked her, I said, hey, listen, I'm curious, what is your next play? Like, what are your big, hairy, audacious goals? And, so anyway, so she wrote me back and she's like, well, what are your big, hairy, audacious goals? And I was like, those ones you never say out loud, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I run a mastermind group called Bold Ambition, and we had just like created the list. And I was like, there's some crazy stuff on my list. And so I was like, oh, should I edit it? I really respect her. Like, should I send her like the messy parts too? And anyway, I was like, you know what? It's really important to me to be transparent. So I'm just going to send her the list as it is. And I did. And she had picked out the craziest thing on my list, the absolute craziest thing. And it is that I want to go to Richard Branson's Necker Island and be an invited guest and be asked to come there early to speak to his staff and be a valued contributor while I'm there. So if you don't know, Richard has these like think tank weekends where he brings people, like 40 people, to come and share information and just, have a great intellectual time, as well as, having a good time on his island in the Caribbean. And that's on my list. And she wrote me back almost immediately. And she said, I know somebody who goes there every year. Do you want an introduction?
That is so cool.
It gets better. So this guy, so she introduces me to him, and he is actually driving like on an hour-long trip from like, Monterey or whatever. And so we talk, and I'm just asking him questions like, hey, who are you? He's a financial advisor who actually made it a goal to go to Necker Island. It took him 4 years to get an invitation there. And now he goes all the time. And him and Richard are texting buddies. And and he's like, this is the part about what I learned with people. He's like, you know what? This is really cool. Nobody ever listens to me like this.
Wow.
Right. And I'm just like soaking up the stories. I just like keep telling me all the things. Right. And by the time we got off the phone, he said, I talked to Richard about this, and I want to rent out the entire island for a private event. Would you like to work on it with me? Yeah.
That is so cool. That is awesome.
So, we go from like this crazy, like my friend Emily admiring Kelly. I invite Kelly to come to this chat. Kelly asks for my BHAG list. She introduces me to somebody. That guy now wants to like throw a private party on Necker Island and work on it together.
That is amazing. It does, to your point that you were making earlier, the encouragement that you want to make to other people is be bold, reach out, because you never know what could happen. And to answer your question too, you're like, I don't know why Michael actually responded to my DM on Twitter.
Yeah.
Well, it was an attitude of like, well, what's the worst that can happen? I'm going to discover something. Maybe about her, maybe about me, but it's not going to be a waste of time, because I had the intention of it not being a waste of time, that I was going to go in with, hey, this is how I want to spend my time. I want to connect with her. Again, I didn't know you from Eve.
Yeah.
And you really can't size you up by the number of Twitter followers you had, or nor how many Twitter followers I had. But there was just something there to say, why not? In fact, everyone that reaches out to me that wants to chat, I always chat with them, unless the reach out is like, hey, I want to sell you something. Like if you're trying to sleep with me on the first date, it's probably not going to work. But everyone else is like, to your point, the way you did it, like, hey, I'm curious about you. Love to spend some time chatting.
Really? Like, who would want to hear that?
Well, going back to what you've learned about people, we all, especially in this noisy world, which it feels even harder to be seen and to be heard because there's so much volume around us. For someone to reach out and say, I want to hear you, I want to see you. Like, who wouldn't eat that up? Like, talk about a dopamine hit. Talk about like a little bit of an ego rub in the right way. Like, yeah, sign me up. Now, I'm sure you reach out to a whole bunch of people and you don't hear anything back. That's going to happen from time to time. But still, you got to you got to take some shots. It's like the Wayne Gretzky cliche quote, like, I miss 100% of the shots I don't take. So you got to reach out, and you start discovering something about other people. You also, through the whole process, discover something about yourself.
For sure. I think I love that you said about you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. And that is one of the things that I would, if I was going to impress upon folks, a good takeaway is reach out with intention of like, I just want to connect. I want to, is there a there? Maybe, I don't know, right? It's no different than dating or, hey, they're cute, but do I really want to go out on a date with them? I don't know. But if you reach out to them, maybe, who knows? But I would say that the bigger part of that is it's, I'm very consistent on reaching out to people. So I make an intention of, ongoing whenever I get this little intuition that says, oh, I'm kind of curious. I actually send a note. I don't even stop to think or edit or pause. I send a note like, oh, if they said something interesting on LinkedIn or somewhere, I'm like, that's really interesting. I want to learn more. So I also think a little bit, I have some journalism training. And so I think like a journalist where it's like, well, they're first person source, right? Like, why not actually have a conversation with them? And so, I'm very curious about the amazing things that people do. And hey, how did like and here's the big point piece. We always hear like the end story of like the amazing thing, like the glory moment, right? I want to know how it came together. I'm very interested because the trophy is the part that you may not actually be able to replicate, but like how they got from A to B, there's usually a nugget there that I can take away, a teachable moment, something I can learn that I can apply to myself. So that's one of the things that I really like. The other thing is that we the shots that you take. Because I'm taking a lot of shots, if somebody doesn't get back to me, like, I don't care. I tried. Right. And so in fact, I was just cleaning up my LinkedIn recently, and I started tracking my numbers just to see where I was because I decided to focus on LinkedIn more. And so it's January now. Since September, when I started tracking, I've increased my connections by 20%.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. When I try and connect with somebody, I always, always, always send a note. A lot of people will just delete anybody that doesn't say something particular. So
I do.
Yeah, they just.
I do unless I know you from something. So that your fireside chat, we met Julie. I popped her a note.
Yeah.
And I didn't put anything because we sort of had already a warm connection because we're all sitting around the fire or sitting around the Google Hangout. But anyone that not like that comes into my universe, I never accept them.
Right. You have to actually, and that's really important. So you have to say something. And what I usually say is like, hey, I'm curious about this thing that you're working on, or I'm curious about your history here. I'd love to hop on a call. Let me know if you'd like to connect. Or oftentimes, like my TEDx talk might tie into something that they said or whatever. So I'll send them like a shortened URL. What happened recently is I was cleaning out my LinkedIn and I could see all of the requests that hadn't been responded to. So I increased my contacts by 20%, but I deleted 68 attempts. These are people that never responded back to me.
Okay.
And that's fine because, we all have those moments. Like, say, for instance, I like to think about like when you go on vacation and you come back and your inbox is full and you just can't bear dealing with all. So you delete anything that is not like absolutely urgent. Well, who knows when my request came in? It could have been in one of those moments, right? And so I can't take it personally because I do the same thing, right? You got to give some grace. But in the meantime, like I have met some world-class people. And this ties in with the COVID question, right? Is that how I've been increasing my network and my contacts since COVID. Like I was both reaching out to people within my own network, forging new relationships. Hey, I'm curious about that. And so as a result, one of the people that popped in on my LinkedIn was a guy. And this is the other thing about making sure you send a note, because that creates a burden for the recipient. And so it's also like, kind of bumping into somebody instead of actually saying hello to them on the street. It's like, I don't know you anything. Like, who are you? I think about a New Yorker, right? A New Yorker would be like, go to hell, dude.
Yeah. Yeah. We'd give a as a New Yorker, or actually live in New Jersey, but close enough to New York, we would give you a special wave and then just continue to walk on by.
Exactly. So make sure you say something like nice, kind, like, show a true intent, right? Because if you're going to start building a contact, start like a good relationship, start solid from the very beginning. And how that starts even on LinkedIn is to make sure you say something like meaningful, as a hello. And so this guy popped into my LinkedIn feed and I was like, who is this? And I looked down at his work history and he had worked for Greenlight Productions. And I was like, wait a minute. I know Greenlight. Greenlight is Keith Ferrazzi's company. And he's the guy who wrote the book, Never Eat Alone, and Who's Got Your Back. And I was like, I'm so curious about the work that he did for Keith. What is the story? So I popped him a note and I said, hey, listen, I would love to hear more about you. And we hopped on a call. We had a fabulous chat. And it turns out he runs a company for thought leaders. And he basically helps people craft their career, if you want to like launch a book or something like that. So that's how he got with Keith. But then there's like this whole business side of things that a lot of people leave off the table. And they don't really think about it. And it's like, why am I not making money? Well, you can make a lot of money. You can make money a lot of different ways. Books are only one of them. And so anyway, so I didn't know that. He opened my eyes to that whole side of life. And then he also has a podcast that was really informative. And he hosts like a weekly meetup. So I go to this weekly meetup. I'm like, okay, who knows what? I'm just experimenting all kinds of crazy ways during COVID, right? And I show up for this meeting and there's a woman there that was an anchor on CNN for 22 years.
Oh, wow.
Two of the founding members of Earth, Wind, and Fire.
Nice.
Carol Dweck's 13-year business partner.
Awesome.
There's all these people. I'm like, I am definitely over my head, but I just kept showing up like, hey, I have some questions. And I put that rookie hat on. And so all of a sudden now I'm meeting these people who have these fantastic careers and are like global speakers and who have done all kinds of stuff. And it's fascinating. And so it all started from that one contact who landed in my inbox. And I was just like, I'm curious. Can we hop on a call? And then
that is so perfect. I love that story. This whole conversation is inspiring me to amp up my game because I do a lot of this too, but I get my inspiration from you. And today, like, I'm even more inspired to do more of it come tomorrow, because one of my big things for the year, like one of my words, you might have picked a word. A lot of people do this. I have 3 words, but I turn them into questions. So one is awareness, one is range, and one is connection. But then each morning I ask myself, how can I gain more awareness? How can I develop more range? And then how can I foster more connection? So because what it does, then it prompts the curious mind.
Yeah.
And with the curious mind, then you can start building action in it. So, and then I can also use those, which I do at the end of the day. Well, how did you build more awareness, Michael? How did you create more range? Where did you build more connections? So I love this. This is like, because what you're demonstrating, what you're sharing is that one can, it's Kevin Bacon a little bit, but we're only a connection away or a couple connections away, and those all ripple. And then you never know who you're going to meet. And some relationships are hot and heavy right from the rip. Others are a slow burn. And we just need to have some patience to nurture those and sort of accept the relationship as it is in that moment. And then all of a sudden the world feels maybe a little bit smaller.
I love that you said that though, too, because I think sometimes it's the same like dating. A lot of it is a lot like dating, right? There's so many great lessons in dating where, sometimes it's a one-night stand. Sometimes it's a relationship that you've been friends for years and then it turns into something really substantial, right? Sometimes it's, something that runs its course. It's really beautiful in the beginning and then it runs its course and you let it go. But I would say, I love that you have your words, and one of the things that I like to do is I ask a lot of questions. I ask a lot of questions to myself, but also on social media. I ask a lot of questions rhetorically, and, kind of like working through some thoughts. And my mastermind is called Bold Ambition. And so we have a practice that we write up our wins every week. And so, like, how did I win the day? How did I win, like, the week? What was the highlight of the week that I moved the needle on? And recently I've started asking, like, the name of the group is Bold Ambition, and it's designed as a safe place for women to be ambitious. But how was I bold, and how was I ambitious?
Love it.
And I start asking myself that every day. Like, what bold thing did I do today? What ambitious thing did I do today? And then at the end of the day, I ask myself that, how was that? And what was really interesting is that by asking those questions and also setting up our wins, like, one of the things that women historically don't like to do is take credit for the things that they actually accomplish. Uh, and by setting up the standard where, like, you're expected to come in and write up your wins and send them to the Slack group every week. So you get in the habit of actually acknowledging things and seeing your own progress on stuff. But we just did a retrospective, and it was fascinating because I started the group in January of 2020, then COVID hit. And I was like, oh my God, we're just getting our legs. Is this thing going to last? Like, what's going on? And I started thinking, what do these people need now? How are we going to get through this moment? How are we going to set each other up for success? Other people are having a really hard time. That doesn't mean we have to have a really hard time. How can we set the tone that this is going to be the best year of your life, regardless of all the noise that's going on? We talked about noise. Regardless of all the noise, regardless of what everybody else is experiencing, how are you going to get through this situation even better than you went in? And, at the time when I started talking about that, I didn't know whether this thing was going to be like 2 months, 6 months, 8 months. Nobody even dreamed it was going to last this long, right? And so I don't know. I was just like, I don't know, but I know that, like, 2008 kicked my ass, right? And so I'm like, I'm not going down like that again, not twice in this lifetime. This is not happening. So I'm like, let's try something else. And I was like, okay, you guys, we got to figure this thing out. And so it was fascinating because of that. Like, how am I being bold? How am I being ambitious? Am I meeting new people? How am I finding new resources? Like, what is the next chapter in my life? Okay, well, if that's not going to work, what will work? And who can help me with that? And how can I find somebody that's going to help add fuel to the fire and help me see through this problem? You were one of the people that I reached out to, and I said, listen, like, what does it look like when you run a business that looks like this? And, and what kind of, like, I talk a lot about money. What does it look like? What kind of income generation can people, I hear people are having a really hard time, but then there's other people who are doing really well. What does that even look like when you're doing really, really well at this thing? And so what was fascinating about it, we just did this retrospective with my group. Every single person reported lifetime record wins.
Oh, wow.
In 2020, like, lifetime. One person, like, announced that she just calculated her net worth is $2 million.
Well, that's terrific. And I imagine, though, even more important that number.
Yeah.
She sees herself differently.
That is a huge, huge statement. And that is 100% true. One of the things about being able to witness the work that, like, Show Your Work. Austin Kleon has a book, Show Your Work. One of the things about seeing the work and the wins as they are unfolding and the steps that it takes in order to put together a win, it is so inspiring to see other people on the journey and to see, like, oh, well, they got a new job. Why can't I get a new job? I should think about getting a new job. What would it look like? One of the women in my group, she started the group. She was out of the country looking for a job. And we started, like, hey, how can this be the best year ever? How can you negotiate the best deal? How can you really just swing for the fences? She ended up getting a job that paid her 68% more than she was making before, right?
Oh, that's great.
Then another person was like, huh, okay. She got a new job, 67% more. She now makes 7 times her age.
Nice.
The next person who got a new job, she got a $125,000 salary increase.
That's amazing. That's well, it speaks to the intention you set at the beginning of the year,
Yep.
framing it out. I'm not going to get necessarily into visioning or
Sure.
manifesting, but just the intention of like, hey, this is going to be the year we're going to have. We ain't going to like relive 2008. We ain't going to go back there. Like we're not going to really do a repeat and redo on that. But if we want to architect a great life, we have to start with the intentions as far as like what we want to build.
Yes.
And to your point, and I see this because I deal with a lot of women clients and serve on the Healthcare Business Women's Association Global Board, which is 10,000 like kick-ass women in healthcare. But so many of them, I would say, based on the numbers and the people I've met, probably more than half don't want to publicize their wins. They sort of want, well, I'm going to let my work speak for itself. And then sometimes usually through male bosses, they don't recognize the work. And then they beat themselves up for not being vocal about their work. But they're like, well, I don't want to be that person that's annoying, that publicizes their work. And the thing is, if you're telling yourself, I don't want to be the annoying person, you are so far away from being annoying. Like you're not even in the same zip code as annoying. If that notion has even popped into your head. And it's this vicious circle of like, I don't want to be annoying and publicize my wins. I want my work to like get the credit it deserves. It doesn't get the credit. And now then we beat ourselves up for not actually speaking up for ourselves. And we have to change that orbit. And what you did is you changed that sort of that circular path that so many people get on by even just doing it in Slack to say, hey, look, we're going to get comfortable speaking up about our wins, no matter how big, no matter how small, but we're going to exercise that muscle so we get better at it. And we start asking for the stuff that we should be asking for. And to the credit of all the women that got bigger jobs and higher paying jobs, I'm going to go after the value I deserve. And how liberating and encouraging and motivating is that? That is so cool.
Yeah, I have goosebumps actually. One of the things that I think is really interesting too is getting that transparency down, because there's that point where people don't want to say how much they make. I always thought it was really funny where, people use their resume to get a job, but they won't show their resume to other people that they know. I'm like, what?
Or they'll caveat like, I don't know. I'm not sure if it's really good. I know, like, what do you think? Here it is. And they make the face and the sound. And it's like, yeah, you're sending this all over the place. This is your press book, if your press kit, if you will. Like, and yeah, we just get in our own head so often. For me, it sort of all comes down to the voice that's in your head, the stories that you tell yourself, your self-narrative. If we can shift that, if we can make that healthier, then I have all the optimism in the world that we can solve tomorrow's problems and probably a handful of today's problems as well.
I think that's a really big thing is like the way I look at it. So our wins, it has like an acronym. So that's we're building next generation wealth. We are building with intention, and we're taking action on negotiating and networking, right? So the WINS actually has an acronym, right? And so one of the things that I think is really interesting is, so on that wealth bit, right? If you're making $50,000 a year, right? Your discretionary income and the kind of problems that you can solve are really quite small. But if you make more money, you have the ability to solve much bigger problems. And so that was one of the things that when we did this exercise this weekend about like 20 years from now, what is that 20-year now person going to be experiencing? And one of the women was like, said that she wanted to pay college tuition for 100 people.
Oh, that's sweet.
Can you imagine?
That's sweet.
Right. And another woman that's in the group, her husband is from Mexico, and she wants to go back to Mexico and teach those people how to be more intellectual driven instead of labor driven, and how to build their own wealth. Right. And so that ripple effect that we are talking about, making money, it's not just for the sake of making money and the badge of being an American or, buying all the stuff. Like, no, it's not about the stuff. It's about what you can do with the money and how the impact that you can make when you make money, and also ease your burden and not have to worry about things with, if you get some sort of disruption or whatever, you're okay. And I've seen that where, I recently had a friend of mine, she had cancer, and she was able to, pay for all of her treatment, get some home health care, all of that kind of stuff, whatever needed to be paid out of pocket, not an issue. Can you imagine? Like, not an issue. And so it's like, well, the story needs to change, because like, how are you actually going to get yourself some ease and some comfort, or, say for instance, like I had a friend of mine last year drop dead of a heart attack at 42, right? If that's your spouse, what kind of disruption is that in your life?
Huge.
Right? Huge. It's not only it's the mourning of the person, but it's like, that's like the lion's share of your income too. Right. So they talk about, and women outlive men. And so there's more women living in poverty at retirement because, we take time off for having childcare. We underpay, have that underpaying aspect of things. Right. So it's like huge. So even to set the tone that if you have more money, how can you, do better things, invest more, that kind of thing, right? And start thinking about building up that muscle from a financial standpoint. And then also, like, this is a great example of how I'm using my network to, okay, I'm seeing down the road that we need to talk about money more. So how can I bring a financial advisor in to come in and talk about how do you build wealth? How do you make smart moves, smart money moves, right? And then influence, right? We're talking about influence. So then I bring in, like, you can't, unless you're seen, you don't get tapped for like great opportunities, right? You actually have to be visible. And so how do you get past that part where, like with my TEDx talk, oh my God, like that came out of the blue. I never applied. They asked me to come speak 2 weeks after my mom died. They said, hey, listen, we have this great opportunity for you. Will you come speak in front of 3,000 people and give a speech? And you've never even given us public talk before. And I'm like,
why not? Let's do it.
Yeah. And so like, even just the mental shift that it takes to be able to say yes to an opportunity like that. And then also get yourself in fighting shape in order to be able to knock it out of the park when you get that opportunity. That is where like flexing that network and being curious about like, hey, I see you're a TEDx speaker. What advice do you have? Or I see you've given this talk. What advice do you have? I'm having trouble with my speech here. Can you review it? Like that was that whole thing about like being more transparent and tipping your playbook and finding resources and people who can actually like add value to you. They love to be able to share their expertise, right? And so, I think that's really important to be able to like show your work. This is a really big premise of mine. And so like, as an example, I want to share this piece. I have a friend of mine that she was negotiating a new job, and we had talked at length about what that would look like. What's the salary? What's the potential? How are you adding value? What's the conversation going on their side? What can you say to counteract that? And when the contract came, like she had negotiated a price verbally. And when the contract came, it was off by $25,000.
Oh, wow.
Like they had offered her $100,000 more than what she was getting. She thought it was 125. So we're talking like the salary was supposed to be $300,000. And it came out at like 275 with the bonus and all this. And I was like, that's $25,000. Like, 5 years ago, that would have been a lot of money to you. So let's just like not take that out of context. That's still a lot of money.
Yeah. If you found 25K on the ground, you're picking it up. Yeah.
Right. I'm like, and so she was like, well, I don't know. What should I do? Maybe I heard him wrong. Maybe, she's literally like talking herself out of this. Right. And I was just like, that is a lot of money. And you having $25,000 now, even if you invest that over the next 20 years, that is a huge sum of money. And you are not going to leave that on that table without even having a conversation about what's going on here. She's like, yeah, I started feeling a little icky, about this whole situation. And maybe I wouldn't actually like working there. I mean, this whole spiral started happening, right? And I was like, it's just a conversation.
Yeah, it's just a conversation. That's all it is. Yeah, we make so much stuff up. I call it MSUing. We create all these like wonderful stories. Most of them aren't true. It keeps us from actually leaning in, doing our work, showing our work, asking for our value. And again, it goes back to the conversation you're telling yourself. Like it all comes down to that. You got to have awareness on that in order for it to shift. But yeah, if we can minimize the stories we tell ourselves and then the intensity of them, the duration of them, that puts us in a position to do better work, to make more of an impact. Like again, to your point, Teresa, it's not for some people, it is about the money. That's how they keep score and that status. But for me, our money is a story. And it's a story about what we want to do with our money, the type of impact we want to make. After collecting a whole bunch of merit badges, for many people, that gets old, right? And that was me before my accident. But to your point, your friend who had cancer, like for us, we were able to withstand all my medical bills from my accident recovery because we had enough wealth built into our family. If we didn't, our lives would have changed tremendously. Like I probably wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now.
I mean, can you imagine like an accident like that? You could lose your house. You could lose, you could lose everything.
Bankrupt. It was a bankrupt city. Like the bills that we had were outrageous. And, we had insurance, but insurance doesn't cover everything. So even the stuff that the insurance company didn't cover, those bills were significant. And it wasn't a one-time thing. I've had 20 years of bills. So that ripple, that's one of those ripples that keeps on rippling. But without that wealth, being smart about our money, our whole lives would be different. It would have forced my hand on some other decisions. And so then we had some freedom. And then ultimately freedom to stay in it, not get burdened by that. And then enough money in the bank too, to make the shift from leaving corporate and a nice existence as a corporate executive and trading that all for like day one, no paycheck, no healthcare, no nothing, to start an entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah. And I think you told me you guys had paid off your house like a long time ago, right?
We wanted to have a debt-free existence. So a big thing for me was to pay off the house. So when we got to 2008, as you referenced earlier, we didn't have anything to worry about. We were able to like weather that storm. My industry wasn't necessarily impacted like a lot of other industries, but everyone was impacted back then, as everyone's impacted right now. But a big thing for me is I just didn't want, I don't want to owe anybody any money. And so then we live within our means. Like we use credit cards, but we pay them off at the end of every month. So we're not paying extra for the stuff that we're buying and purchasing, but we're going to be like really aggressive savers as a way to have more impact. So for our kids, but for everyone else, as far as charity and impact and just doing different things with my business, as far as like sponsorship and donations and, making things happen, like just being here, right? Like everyone that comes on, we make a donation to your favorite charity, right? So I don't think there are like many podcasts out there or like leadership academies doing that. But for me, that's an important thing. For others, something else is really important. That's really cool. And I think so wealth creation and the work that you're doing is wonderful. So that actually leads me to one question I wanted to ask you, because I geek out about resilience. You referenced 2008, as we've already talked about. This year or last year, and also this year, is going to be a year that we're going to have to tap into resilience. So how would you finish this sentence? Resilience all comes down to what?
I know I should have an answer for this. For me, I think that the resilience to me is, I had a client one time who hired me and to help do PR for his book. His the publisher hadn't been doing enough publicist work. And his phrase to me was, "I'm not going down like that."
I love that.
And that, like, I always think about that, like a cat going into the bathtub. I'm not going down like that, man. Like, and that I think was a driving force for me this year. I'm not going down like that. Like other people, like, I'm so sorry, right? But how can I shift my mindset? And how can I make amazing things happen in spite of the narrative about what's going on or in spite of the challenges? I think that at the end of the day, we all deal with constraints one way or another. We just got a whole new set of constraints. That's all, and I don't see that as any hugely different. And so it was funny because I also like to think about, how do you equip yourself with even better resources?
Yeah.
Right? Like, okay, I think about it like this. This is as good as I could make it all happen, right? But there's always somebody who's kind of like on the periphery who's like, "Hey kid, did you know that if you just like tweak this one little thing, it'll change everything?" And so I got really intentional about asking everybody, "Hey, you know what? Like, what do you think? Like, what should I do about this? What is the thing?" And I'll never forget, we have a mutual friend, Kristen.
Yes. Our favorite geek.
Yeah. And she's a multimillionaire. And I asked her one day, I said, "Listen, it really annoys me that you don't talk about how you made your money more. Because there's a teachable moment there, right? Like how do we remove the stigma of money and actually show like the work boots of actually making that stuff happen?" And she's really good about talking about that one-on-one. And her response to me was, "Most people don't want to know." And I was like, "Well, I want to know." She's fine. Ask me anything you want. So we sat down and 2 hours later, she literally like walked me through every single promotion, every single thing she negotiated, every stock option, like everything, every house that she bought, like how much she made on it, what the next play was when she hired a financial advisor, the tax person, like all of it. She'd like all of it. And it was the most profound, generous thing that anybody has ever done for me. At the end of our call, I started crying. She's like, "What's up with this?" And I'm like, one, I'm super grateful. Like, this is a conversation that we do not have. And you answered every question that I wanted to know. And two, I'm really upset that I'm the only person who got a chance to hear this.
Beautiful.
Like, it still like really moves me. And she said, "Well, if you think anybody else would want to hear this, set it up. I'll tell them." And so I put together a fireside chat with my Bold Ambition group and invited some other people. I think maybe you were there.
One way for me to get to know her even better, because up until that point, I didn't have a strong connection with her.
Yeah. And she was even more transparent with this PowerPoint deck that she put together.
She laid it all out. There's no doubt about it. Yeah. It was great.
It's just like, wow, okay then. But it was beautiful. And I'll tell you why, is because everybody that was on that call suddenly was like, "Well, how much is my net worth? Like, how much stock did I get? How was that a good money move when I bought my house? Should I buy another house?" There's a woman in my group. She's an amazing saver. She's super frugal. And she just through that conversation, she realized she missed the entire bull market run of the stock market for the last 10 years. And she could have been retired like many years ago, but she missed the whole opportunity. And what was amazing about seeing somebody else showing their work, it like lit a fire under her so big that now she's actually pursuing other ways to generate wealth. And like how, like she's doing like private lending. And, I was like, wait, who does that? Like, I don't know anybody that does that. She does that. So it cracked the conversation wide open. And it was like, okay, I'm not earning enough. How do I earn more? How do I save more when I go in the door? How do I get more money? Like unbelievable. And, like what she wants to do with that money is like, it's profound, like she struggled to get scholarships to go to college and ended up somehow graduating from college with no debt. And now she wants to set up a college fund for 100 other people.
Again, it's amazing considering how many students come out of college burdened by their debt and influences the choices that they're going to see. So what a gift. And,
yeah. And I would say though, too, like one of the things about that, so as a connector, I'm also, one of the things that I like to do is I'm meeting all these people. I take the best of the stories and I turn around and tell somebody else, right? So that there's the teachable moment it passes through me. I'm the conduit to be able to share the good stuff, right? Like, here's what I learned. Oh my God, can you believe this? Like everybody in my orbit, they get all the good stuff, right? And like, I learned this, here's the next step, or I see you're doing this. How about this? Well, so one of the things that when you mentioned that college debt, I think is really interesting. I met this woman, I gave a talk on negotiation for Lean In Seattle, which is the fastest growing lean in group in the world. And it's also the biggest one in the world. And I did a breakout session on negotiation. And there was this woman there that she was just bright and smart and made herself known. So talk about visibility, make herself known. And so after the talk, she's like, I'd really like to talk to you more. She came to me and I said, okay, great. Let's go have drinks. I'm going to grab a friend of mine and we'll all go have drinks. And so we did. And as we're sitting at this place and I'm talking to her, I'm like, well, what's your story? And, she, her dad helped her be an entrepreneur. She started her first business when she was like 9 or something like that, selling gumballs or, something like that, like a coin operated job. Right. Anyway, she's like, I'm on track to save to have $100,000 net worth by the time I'm 25. What? Who does that? I'm like, tell me everything. Like, and P.S., how old are you? She's like, I'm 24. Well, where are you on track for that? And she's like, well, I may not hit it by the time I'm 20, like by the time of my 25th birthday, but I'm on track for that within the time that I'm 25. I'm like, you need to rebrand one. What she did, her website is her first 100K. Anyway, she hit that number and then she did a press release on herself.
That's so cool.
It hit Market Watch, CNBC. Like it just exploded. And then she created like this whole training behind that about how to save money and all this kind of stuff. She launched her business in January of last year, 2020 in January. And she made $600,000 last year.
Good for her. That's awesome.
26.
Not bad.
Right. And so it's like, wait a minute. So now that I've seen her do this, right? I told everybody, I'm like, oh my God, this woman is amazing. But now I'm like, okay, the challenge is how do you graduate from college? Not just debt free. Can you graduate from college with $100,000? Could you? Could you? And so since then, one of the contacts that I made this summer, she wrote a book, and my friend Mary is the head of global internships for Microsoft.
Okay.
They pay $35,000 for a summer internship. I'm like, you work for them for four years.
Not bad at all.
You actually could graduate.
That beats my internship.
Right? I mean, but like, how can you do it differently? Like, like it doesn't have to be hard.
I think that's the big question for this year for so many people. Having lived through what we lived through, and I know there's still some people that want to just go back to normal, but like Normal and Elvis and the toothpaste, they're left the building out of the tube, however you want to phrase it. It's flipping into 2021. I was just speaking with a client before we sat down to chat here. And she's like, I just hope we don't go back to how it used to be. Now, she hasn't necessarily figured out what the new normal, quote unquote, is, but there's that intention to create it. And I think that's a big question, I think, for all of us, as we're still going through the tunnel. We're still in a little bit of this trauma, or a lot of the trauma, depending on where you live. But it's an opportunity to make subtle shifts, and in some cases, maybe bigger ones, to see what is possible. We already know that work, as we know it, has changed forever. And because we spend so much time at work, that means life as we know it has changed forever. Now we get to create it. Now, there are a bunch of people that won't take that invitation seriously, and it'll be like the tail wagging the dog, because other people will create their new reality, their new normal. But we all have an opportunity as we begin the year to be intentional, much like you did with your mastermind, be intentional with what type of life we want to create, to be the architects of this one wild and precious life that we all have. So I'll get you out on this one. So, because this is all about connection. So I got to ask you, if people want to connect with you, how do they do it?
The best way is by LinkedIn, but I don't respond to LinkedIn requests that don't have a message attached to them. So let me know that you heard Michael and I together, and I'd be happy to connect. I think that would be a really amazing to meet some of your people. I'm so curious to hear some of the people that you have in your orbit. But yeah, so make sure you leave a little love note there when you do send an invitation. I would love to say hello. But Michael, I love that you said that about what the next like new normal and all that kind of stuff. What if we don't even want to go back to normal? Like, how good could it be?
It could be really good.
I'm the most amazing thing ever.
I am hopeful and optimistic, even though we are in one sticky situation. There's chaos. We're in the mud, as people have heard me say on this show and on the Leadership Academy. No mud, no lotus. Like, you got to get through. Sometimes you just got to get through the mud and the muck and the dark and the dank and all that to appreciate the light, to have the light, lotus bloom. I think this is a moment that's happening for us or through us, not to us, that we can create something amazing out of this moment. But, we all have to have the intention that we want to put in the work. We have to put in the emotional labor, a little bit of the sweat, the curiosity to look at things maybe a different way, an appreciation of our wrinkles and our scars and our blemishes and everything else, and start getting to work on it. So thank you so much for doing this. This has been great. This has been, as I mentioned up front, I was so eager to have the conversation today, and this did not disappoint. So many wonderful stories. And I just love that you decided to sit down with us and share your wisdom about connection.
I love that. Can I add one more thing?
Yeah, sure thing. Go for it.
So that part about the lotus and the mud, I love that. One of the things that I am really reckoning with myself is don't get distracted by other people's mud.
Yeah. Amen to that.
That's not my mud. That you're noisy and you're impacting me, and it's making me think horrible things and like life is coming to an end or whatever. But that's not even my story.
Yeah.
Right? You're so deeply impressionable. So then that's the other thing where I'm really trying to bring the good stuff back to people. Like, hey, wait a minute. It doesn't have to be like that. Like, here's a great success story that happened. Like my friend, he got a new job. He got $100,000 bonus in the middle of COVID and has never met his coworkers in person.
That's so cool. And those stories,
they're everywhere,
are out there. It's not like a one-off. To that point, be careful of the mud that you hang out with. And for me, and in like my vernacular, it's like choose your Peloton wisely, like ride with the people who bring out the best in you. And this past year was a perfect opportunity to assess that. If you didn't, this year is a perfect opportunity to assess that.
Call the herd.
We ain't doing this by ourselves.
No.
We need people
that are inspiring you. Like you can actually bring them into your orbit and be very, very deliberate about that. And if they're not adding like to your fire and they don't leave you feeling inspired or offer good wisdom or whatever, like, okay, this journey has come to an end. Next, like curate your Peloton, because not everybody wants to, like in your vernacular, not everybody can keep the pace. Right.
Yeah.
And some people are like, you know what? I really like that stop that we had like 30 miles back. I'm going to hang out there for the day. And I'm like, nope, I'm riding this race all the way through.
Yeah. Some people can't keep up and some people don't want to ride where you want to ride. So that, you know what? No judgment. Anyone don't have to go there. They do them. You do you.
Sometimes they're like, oh man, I should, let me see if I can like throw the accelerator on the gas. I want to ride with them after.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Teresa, thank you so much again for sitting down with us and sharing your wisdom, and people connect with her, but make sure you write a note. So good to see you.
Thanks, Michael. It was great.
Bye-bye. Hey there, it's Michael. So what did you think? Isn't Teresa wonderful? Now, she's no longer a stranger to you, but that should not stop you from reaching out to her on any social platform. I'll include her TEDx talk in the show notes, as well as her LinkedIn profile, along with Facebook and even Twitter. That's where we met. That was the start of our relationship. That has now blossomed into something special. So thank you for listening to this week's Kintsugi Podcast and our conversation with Teresa on the importance of connecting with strangers, trying to make the world just a little bit smaller. Because as we know, we can't do this alone, especially if you want a great career and a great life, the type of life and career that begins from the inside out. Now, before I let you go for this week, there's one thing I want to share with you that I just found that's so cool. It's a new app. So for all my podcast fans out there, it's called Podopolo, Podopolo. And the Kintsugi Podcast is one of the very first podcasts on their beta, and they're about to launch their full-blown app, the new app, version 2.0, this time, well, in a few months from now. I think around March or April. So I want to encourage you to download it now and start connecting with the Kintsugi Podcast and all of our conversations about resilience there. There's some really cool features. I'm going to let you play with it. But again, it's called Podopolo, Podopolo. I'll put that link also in the show notes. So I hope you'll download it. It's free and we can connect there as a different way of connecting and a different way for you to access some really cool podcasts and change the way you listen to them. So with that, again, thank you for listening to this week's conversation about resilience. We'll be back next week with another conversation about resilience on the Kintsugi Podcast. In the meantime, I hope you'll hit the subscribe button, write a review, or share this with the members of your Peloton. And as always, don't forget to pause, breathe, and reflect. And of course, have fun storming the castle. We'll talk to you next week.